Hi everybody, how are you doing today? Seriously, I would like to know. Let me know what's going on in your life right now. Tell me in the comments section. The comments can be such an uplifting, wonderful, kind place here on my channel, and maybe we can all offer each other a little bit of love for whatever we're going through right now. I'm so glad you decided to click this video and take some time to watch today. I really appreciate it. And the topic is going to be underrated palettes, severely underrated palettes. And it's not just a situation where it's something I love so much and I've talked about it so much and I just feel like people aren't getting on board with it. I mean, I could talk about Profusion $5 palettes and the Bare Minerals Gen Nude palettes till I'm blue in the face. I think it's fairly well known that I feel like those products are kind of an underrated hidden gem, just for example there. It's pretty well known how I feel about palettes from the Balm. I think those are kind of as a whole underrated. But what I want to talk about today is stuff that I've actually pulled from my collection, stuff that is sitting in my stash that I think I am guilty of not really recognizing its full goodness, you know? So underrated, underused, underloved, that's what we're trying to bring light to in this video. Frog in my throat. Also, because I love the topic of both underrated makeup and palettes, I thought it would be fun to bring this idea to you in my Instagram little question answer feature. So a few days back I asked, you know, is there a palette that you absolutely love that you think is totally underrated? And I thought I would share some of the popular responses there. If a lot of you feel a certain palette is underrated, does that cancel out its underrated quality? No, I don't think it does, because you guys are speaking from what you actually love and use and whatever, and I think the perception of something being underrated is how we see it talked about, or not really talked about much at all, by the world out there in YouTube and social media, just, you know, in general. So here are the ones that I plucked from my collection that maybe at one time they were hot to me or just really caught my attention, but in the sea of new makeup releases, they kind of quickly fell to the bottom. I mean, I'm gonna really be hitting you with some things that maybe you haven't thought about hardly at all, or it was so underhyped that you didn't even know about it all. First thing, this palette from Tarte here. This is called the Clay Play Must Have Eye and Cheek palette. I know they have a version of this that I believe just had contour shades down here, but look what this one has. This has a bronzer, blush, and highlight that are actually really, really good. And then several different sort of like pre-put together trios, although I mixed them all up on my eyes today for this kind of warm brown look, but that little splash of brightness on the lid is actually coming from this light lilac shade. Love that. It's a hard palette to show because the background is so metallic, but I feel like it's a nice mix of warm brown options here. And then you've got this nice little cool sector in the middle with a deep plum and a really, really light brightening lilac shade. Love the bronzer, love the blush. That's got a little bit of a satin finish in it. And then the highlight, well, honestly, it could be just a little bit flaky at face value, but if you really try to buff it in as you apply, the end result is beautiful. I mean, I'm loving it on my skin right now. I have a super matte foundation on. I'm trying that new foundation from Too Faced, the Born This Way matte, but then I've got that glow happening on my cheeks, which is courtesy of both the blush and the highlight. Now, all the shadows are matte except for this one, which has a little bit of just a hint of a pearly sheen, but you guys know my love for an all matte look. You know, a flawless, natural, neutral, all matte I can totally get on board with. And I'm just loving the way that looks on my eyes today. They blend flawlessly. They're definitely something that you tap into and want to tap off the excess because you really get plenty with just a light pressure into the product. Big mirror in here, but it's a multitasker, right? I love a multitasking palette. That's why it kind of surprises me that this was sort of sitting dormant in my collection for quite some time. Now, I've gone through some major decluttering of palettes. There's a lot of like limited edition stuff and a lot of stuff from Tarte, frankly, that I let go of. But this one I did keep because I know I saw value in it, but now it's like, gosh, I want to use that some more because it's so dang handy and user-friendly and nice quality for everything on the inside. So to me, that's been a product that, from my perspective, I haven't been giving this the credit it was due, and it's really a nice product. Kind of random here. I have talked about this one before, but yet again, it's kind of fallen fallen under my radar, but it's this palette from Sigma. Sigma makeup in general is pretty underrated, I think, but this highlight and contour palette, do you guys remember when I was talking about this in the past? And I remember talking about this shade called Pop in here and how that can be actually such a beautiful, like kind of soft neutral blush actually. You've got a glowy highlight, 3 tones of contour here, even more of a golden shimmery bronzer. It's a really well put together palette and super nice quality products on the inside. They've got a blush palette as well, but there's something about the Sculpt palette that I just felt was so like pretty much every face step outside of like just your matte powder. But I can get use out of all of it. It can very easily become an eye palette as well. The highlight in here is absolutely gorgeous. Love that. There's nothing chunky about it. It's super smooth. Again, this color just on the cheeks, try that if you have this and you haven't used that as almost blush already. It's kind of rose gold, you know, it's not going to offer a ton of intensity, but it's like a beautiful sort of glow from within type look. But I would highly recommend this palette. I have recommended this palette, but yet again, you know, I kind of lost touch with it, so I wanted to give that a mention. And on the topic of Sigma, here's another one that I came across that it's like, what? This is such a beautiful palette. The Enchanted palette, okay? I know Corda Rosa is kind of like their newer thing, and I do love that. I've got it actually right here handy because I do use it quite frequently. But whatever happened to the Enchanted palette, y'all? This is gorgeous. It has some really pretty, complex, unique statement type shimmers in here, but I do love that they've put in all the mattes of mid and deep tones, even a nice light matte here that help you integrate those shades and work with them. As you know, if you've seen my Once palette, I'm a big fan of the lilac and the spring green. I think those are really pretty accent type shades, and guess what? You've got a little green. You've got some very unique tones of green in this palette with, you know, just amazing shimmer to some. The shade called Electrum over here, like wow! And so picture those shades working in with the deep rich forest green and this warmer terracotta brown, this icy lavender shade right here. You know, there's just some stunning things happening in this palette. Plus, every Sigma palette, do you realize pretty much every Sigma palette you're getting actual Sigma quality brushes that you're gonna want to use. Here they've put an E38 and an E54 on here that are both completely usable brushes. Flat one to help lay down some of this shimmer and a great size blending brush. Sigma's quality in their pressed powder products is really so fantastic, and just the color combos in here are really unique and special, so that's something I want to grab out and use some more and definitely declare it underrated. Here's something that completely snuck up on me in my collection as I was going through my drawers. This NYX Ultimate Shadow palette in the color Phoenix. Let's look at this for a second. Like, I don't know, where have I been? I don't think I've ever used this, but this is so pretty. Yes, you kind of got to be a warm lover to really appreciate this, but don't we love that they put in a super murky olive green, and there is a black to balance things out, and there also is plum, and there is rosiness mixed in with the fiery warmth of that orange and that red orange. We do have some shimmer in here. I'll point to the shimmers. Boom, 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 and boom, and a little bit in boom. But there's a lot of intense matte in this palette, actually. It's vibrant, it's gorgeous. I section off different areas. Like, look at this little quad in the bottom, you know, like that's beautiful. There's a lot to appreciate in a relatively small palette that really catches you with its brightness, but then you start looking and you're like, wait, what? They put in, you know, that shade to mix in with this stuff. Differing tones of yellow, everything from honey mustard to pure mustard. I'm really digging the looks of this, and I think this is grossly underrated and needs to be used. How about Makeup Geek? I do feel like Makeup Geek is pretty firmly on a lot of makeup lovers' radar. I think when she came out with her new eyeshadow formula and what are they called, the Matrix palettes. Last time I checked, the big Matrix palettes were out of stock, but note to editing Emily occasionally as you do this, double check that and update people, because that is something I want to try, and I know those have gotten a lot of attention. But what about her smaller palettes that have been pre-put together? You will get them as individual singles to put into a palette like this that's magnetic. And this is the one for, I believe it's for brown eyes is what it's geared toward. The colors in here are absolutely dazzling. I mean, buttery textures, super intense, really nice pairings here with the iciest of icy colors. You're getting burgundy, you're getting true plum, you're getting more of a berry shade, a black that we know can be so essential if you want to use that as liner, if you want to take your look to an immediate dramatic place. These softer shades that work so beautifully in the crease, I love this. This being in there is so important. The warmth and the little bit of like rosy mixed with terracotta in that shade is super special. Like, this is such a well put together palette, like a well designed color scheme, and the combination of that with the incredible quality of the shadows is just amazing. But I don't hear people really talking about this part of her collection that's come out, you know, these pre-thought out palettes. But that one, my word, so great. And for me, it was something that I immediately, when I got it, I think I acknowledged it as such, but then, you know, it just kind of falls under the radar. Now it's back on the radar, don't worry. Here's another underrated one from me that really like spiked for a time. This was actually what I wore when I was giving birth to Rhett. Yes, I remember these things, and I do remember that eyeshadow staying on for well over 24 hours. So this is legit, this works. But this is the Viseart Neutral Mattes Milo palette, and these tones, these speak to me, this warmth, but also the cool. I love that I'm getting plum. I love that I'm getting berry pinkness, but those shades, when these two little guys down here start working their way in to all this warmth in the top couple of rows, it's absolutely beautiful. Let's not forget the sapphire blue down here in the bottom, right? And your nice, cool, works for anything dark brown. I love Viseart's quality with their eyeshadows. I am amazed that this one does not get more buzz just out in the world. I was looking at the best sellers backwards on Sephora's website the other day. Yeah, that's what I do for fun. There's just different ways you can categorize what you're looking at there, as I'm sure you all know. You can look at palettes, you can filter it by like newest or bestsellers or the price or whatever, but then you can reverse that. So I went to the end and I looked at the worst sellers first. This one is pretty low on the popularity list, but it's an absolutely worth your while palette, mainly for those who appreciate warm shades. If you're rolling your eyes and you're like, okay, Em, you've mentioned warmth in a lot of these palettes, I just don't really like the warm shades. All right, here's something that's gonna knock it out of left field and show you some cool, also some warm, also a brand I haven't really talked about, but when I got these, I thought these were pretty fantastic. The KKW Beauty matte palettes. These came out when she was doing kind of like a 90s inspired supermodel collection, and I got the matte cocoa and the matte smoke. They may have come as a set, actually. Look at matte smoke, y'all. Okay, is this cool or is this cool? Look how they've even kind of rooted it in a navy and a black, but these are some very smooth, beautiful to work with matte textures here. If you like a matte eye, I feel like I've pulled a lot of matte, but no, there's a lot of glitz in that Sigma palette. But this is actually beautifully done, and you can get such a pretty kind of sculpted matte eye out of this palette. I've definitely used it, but I want to use it more. And then in contrast, here's the warm palette too, or they call this the matte cocoa. So there you can see splashes of more orangey shades. It's not really like an on fire warm palette like the Phoenix one from NYX was. You know, there's no red in here. There's no like loud orange, but in a subtle way, it definitely is warm. And if you look at it compared to the cool, you really feel that shift, right? I love these. These are really good for my matte loving self. I want to use those more. And the last one I'm going to mention that I pulled out as underrated is the Too Faced Natural Lust palette. I just plain hadn't opened this up in a while, and when I did, it almost took my breath away. Like, this is a really, pretty palette. The size of it makes me think of what they sometimes do maybe with a holiday palette or something, you know, the splashes of color, but I really like the choices in here. I like that berry. I like that they've thrown in kind of a metallic olive. There's some really pretty shimmers if you're in the mood for that, but then you've also got everything from light to dark balance, just 100%. You can get a very smoky look here, a very neutral look. I feel like I mentioned when I initially reviewed this that there's a lot of takes on rose gold in this palette. I don't necessarily mind it, but just you might see a little shade overlap here and there. There's a lot of stuff in here. But you know, why not use this more? Why not take advantage of some of these pretty shades in here that are, you know, definitely my wheelhouse kinds of colors. Not just in warmth, but also in cool shades. There's some pretty kind of taupey or silvery shades in here too, but who else has this? Have you been using this? There's also, of course, the Natural Love palette that came first. That probably, frankly, is underrated as well. Now, let me pull up my phone where I took notes on some of the things that I saw being mentioned again and again from you guys as things you saw as underrated palettes. And thank you to everybody who brought up the needs and the wants palettes. I appreciate that. I'm not trying to spotlight myself in this video, but I wanted you to know you were seen, you were heard. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm glad you enjoy those palettes. By the way, the status of those, the wants still on sale at Ulta. I mean, folks, we're coming up on 2 years, the 2-year anniversary of these palettes coming out, and it's still on sale in Ulta. I'm amazed. The Needs is now exclusively on Revolution's website. That is my, you know, multitasking full face palette. The Once is the eyeshadow palette, and I'm very proud to have been part of that, and thank you so much for how you continue to receive those palettes well, even after all these 2 years. But let's just go through some of this viewer feedback. A lot of people, probably the most frequent answer I saw was the Tartelette 1 palette. This came out quite a while back. It's all matte, it's pretty cool, and I was surprised to see so many mentions of this. But talk about things that kind of have their spike when things first come out, and then they trickle off, and they may be trickling off of your favorite YouTuber's radar, but many of you as makeup consumers, you're saying, hey, no, I've got this, I'm still using this, I'm still loving this. That's what I'm seeing in some of these answers. So Tartelette 1 was definitely mentioned. Also, the Tartelette in Bloom was a close answer after that. That one has a little bit of shimmer. It branches out a little bit from that super cool color scheme. Too Faced Chocolate Gold was mentioned many times. That's a really interesting palette. You know, it brings in some color. It brings in some pretty glitzy finishes. Lorac Unzipped. Oh my gosh, you know, I feel like I've acknowledged that one for some time as being a very underrated palette. It is for the lovers of rose gold and everything that supports and enhances a rose gold look. Several mentions of the Lorac Pro palettes, especially the 1 and the 2. So the 1, that classic OG palette, it has your row of mattes, it has your row of shimmers. I really feel like it's a terrific shadow wardrobe for somebody just trying to build up their collection and have a really complete set of shades. But then the 2 comes in, and that goes for a little more of those off the beaten path colors. You know, you've got maybe a peach, you've got a navy, you've got some different takes. And I think if you have the 1 and 2, you've really got a lot in terms of different shades and many different looks you could create. I saw several mentions of Milani's Soft and Sultry. Milani does have some beautiful palettes. I think they run around $20. It's the kind of price tag that makes you kind of look twice at drugstore products and say, is it worth it? But I know that Soft and Sultry palette is really nice. Loved seeing mentions of the e.l.f. Mad for Matte palettes. We've seen the bite-sized palettes get a lot of hype. We've seen the larger palettes like the New Classics or Retro Paradise. Those get a decent amount of buzz as well, and for good reason. These are good quality products at a very fair price. But what about those skinny palettes that they have in a whole range of options? But mainly I saw like Mad for Matte, I guess the original one, and then there's a 2 that has some pretty kind of sunset vibes going on in it. Those are great. Persona palettes, this brand. Now this is something I haven't even gotten into myself, so maybe I should, because many of you speak very highly of that brand and you think it's very underrated. And Buxom palettes were also mentioned. I remember when I made my own Buxom palette and I love it. They're really nice quality shades. They also have some pre-done palettes. Actually a couple of palettes that I've nearly bought several times, but for whatever reason I've held back back on, but they are really nice, soft, blendable, pigmented eyeshadows. So those were some of the responses that I was seeing from you guys quite frequently in my little survey, and I thought I'd share that with you today. We love rooting for the underdog here on this channel, do we not? So thank you for being here, and I will see you guys again very soon. Bye.